Good morning, Trumptopia. A special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Hosted by the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's talk Trump.
Judiciary Committee Showdown. It's going down right now, folks. Tune in if you can. I'm going to keep this short because you really should just go watch it instead of listening to talking heads like me talk about it. But here I am doing my job as a talking head, going to talk about it. So, if you want to see the left-right, us versus them, echo chamber duality, dichotomy happening live in front of you, this kind of event, this live broadcast of the Judiciary Committee hearing over the action to, I think they're trying to hold William Barr in contempt, so everyone gets a turn to speak their mind. They have this thing, I'm sure there's a funny technical term for it, I don't know what it's called off the top of my head, but the modality that they're in is that a person makes a statement and then the next person is asking for recognition from the chair of the committee in order to strike the previous statement down through their own statement. And they're just taking turns striking each other's word down, which is kind of hilarious. And I'll admit to you guys, I haven't watched all of it. I wasn't aware that they were going to be televising it, so I wasn't prepared and ready watching from the moment it began. And ultimately, because of time constraints, I watched, I think I watched for about half an hour, maybe upwards of 45 minutes. And then I had to be like, okay, I got to say my piece on this and move on with my day. What I was able to observe in the time that I watched, and I know that, not having seen the full event, it's easy to be criticized for not knowing what I'm saying, etc. But from what I did see, and there was some eloquent speaking, and there was some sort of like, oh, you have to read off a thing, don't you, kind of speaking. But everyone, I think I saw probably 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats speak in reaction to the previous speaker, and in sometimes not so much direct reaction to, but rather just spitting out what they got to say, what they had come in to say. And what was fascinating to me, and I think illuminating to anyone who really is open to questioning beyond the normal range of questioning about how politics functions, is that it was really, 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 really easy to see that no matter what they were saying, each of the individuals were clearly operating from a position of us, my group over here, is righteous, and your group is not. So it's us versus them, and you're the them. To put it in other words, the way I put it in the cover for the show, or in the opening blurb for the show, for this particular episode, each of them's pretending to wear the white hat, right? But at the same time, each of their white hats is also, like the black hat for the other team, and like they're playing it on multiple levels, right? Like the Republicans know, I think, that at least those up there on the stage, I think they understand that it's their job to be the crazy bad guys on the wrong side of history. And the way that they're playing it is by pitting their base against the left's and promising their base that it's the left, that it is the bad guys and on the wrong side of history. And the Democrats up there on the stage know that they are, in this particular moment, technically the good guys. They get to wear the actual white hat. They're going to get to win this this conflict in this moment of the play, probably. And that they are, here to play the shining knight on the white horse good guys. The problem is that in order to maintain the position of power relationship they have with their bases, they have to sort of always, flip. They always have to flip their the whole paradigm inside out, right? They always have to adhere to the self-righteous us versus them modality. Now, it was fascinating to listen to people on the right intimate, if not one guy straight out declared that the left was committing treason. Now, it was also really humorous to have the left point out to the right that who are you investigating? Your own party? Because everyone involved with the Mueller investigation at the top is a Republican. Mueller, lifelong Republican. Rosenstein, lifelong Republican. The people behind those names that were the ones that said, hey, wait a minute, we should maybe look into this. Republican. Even the dreaded FBI agent that was so out to destroy Trump, Republican. So if there is a treasonous, subversive movement in a party to target and go after Trump, it doesn't seem to be in the Democratic Party. It seems to be, or have been, in the Republican Party. Now, my argument is that technically no one's committed treason, but that they're going to throw those words around to whip the bases into a frenzy. And that the purposes of this are to continue to drive this wedge of conflict between the two ideological echo chambers, keeping everyone too busy with the argumentation, with the fighting of, well, it's your party that's the treasonous one, and you're the ones who betrayed the country, and we're the ones that are the real patriots. And yet both parties do seem to continually have a pattern of decision-making that feeds not their supposed stated objectives, but rather some third unacknowledged momentum, right? Like, isn't it weird how many things Trump has done that are not really what he promised? Isn't it weird, going back from before Trump mania on both sides took hold? Let's look back to a classic golden era conflict between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, Obamacare. And this is a classic example. I used to try to bring this up to people's attention, and it would just melt their minds, and they couldn't cope, and they would just start spewing knee-jerk, memorized, bullet point, regurgitated talking points that were effectively the fake news equivalent from before fake news, which is like, oh, that's just your party's lies and brainwashing. But Obamacare was Mitt Romney care, and Mitt Romney's a Republican. And Mitt Romney got Mitt Romney care from that deep state-like think tank institution of Republicanism called the Heritage Foundation. So, right? Like, both parties do this, though, right? Remember when the child separation controversy was blowing up and Trump was like, well, it's an Obama-era law. He was both exaggerating but also not exaggerating. There was, indeed, border family separation activities and the sort of preliminary infrastructure to support those kinds of activities going on during the Obama administration. So, what I suggest to you, my friends, as we watch the clown show, do you ever notice how rare it is for both parties to speak in the same room at the same time, under the same, shot? Like, this kind of event, like today's televised hearing at the Judiciary Committee regarding Mr. Barr's obvious lying and potential obstruction, it's a rarefied event. And it's when you can see the two parties side by side using the same psychological tactics, the same kinds of spin, but in their inverse opposite directions, that you realize the parties truly are a sort of yin-yang, the bird can't fly with only one wing sort of attached to each other, symbiosis of psychological polemics that are not independent from one another, but rather distractionary boundaries that define a third direction. The Democrats are never going to really take us any further to the left than they pretend to play. And although the pendulum swing of normalcy is about pushing those limits, it's one of my most controversial statements about what I think is actually going on right now in this moment in history. And we've got to zoom out from the finger-pointing and blame-laying. One of the most interesting things, so people on the right are saying that it's the left's treasonous investigation that really should be investigated and held accountable. But, of course, that's nonsense, because all of the individuals responsible and that conducted the investigation were from the right. Now, a lot of the left has then clung to the potential outcomes of what such an investigation might render, which makes it easy to blame the left for the investigation. But the left itself is not free of sin, right? And they spend a lot of time deflecting from that and pinning a lot of our attention to the right's more obvious corruption. But when you do a really open-minded analysis of just the last 50 years worth of history, you find that both parties ultimately tend to render the same kinds of results, practically speaking, in terms of what goes on in our world. Regardless of whatever promises they make, we've gotten to the place we're at now. If you strip away the political argument and just look at what's wrong with our community of communities that we call a nation, It took both parties to get here. And no matter how much they fight and argue, both parties are complicit in getting to this point in time that we are at. And if there's one thing that just our lifetimes, just the last 50 years worth of history should prove, is that arguing and fighting about ideology doesn't fucking solve a goddamn thing. Right? If it did, we would have more solutions instead of more of this clown show circus act of polemic, mutually exclusive, and yet totally codependent, us versus them, conflict generating pomp and circumstance on television today. I'm not trying to take away from the truth of the need for a resistance movement against this particular president. But I want also to broaden the scope of our public discourse, folks. That's why I do this crazy, disorganized, and unorthodox, and totally unscripted, and totally, to the best of my understanding of myself, I am not being forced to say what I think by anyone else. And I think that our solutions exist outside of the little political echo chamber boundaries that we've been forced to think are the only paths of problem solving available to us. All right? So it's fascinating to watch, and if we approach it, mind you, with the understanding that politics is theater, political theater is entertainment. That's personally the perspective I bring to it. And then I pick it apart for its flaws. And, both parties, the two antagonists that are supposed to be making this show entertaining, they're not getting really strong reviews from me. Both parties could do a lot better, I think, at making the drama more relevant to real life. Now, I say that with some sort of strange nuance, right? Like, usually a person might say, oh, politics is just theater, as a sort of really deep dismissal of what politics is about, with a kind of inherent accusation of it being fake. I think that in many ways it is, in fact, not fake. As I always like to remind folks, nothing is as absolute as any absolutist propaganda would want us to believe. Having said that, there's a lot of bullshit, right? And there's a lot of layers of lying. And there's a lot of distractions and red herrings and bells and whistles and nonsense. But deep down, because everyone involved is a human, deep down, political shenanigans, I suspect, must also serve or be influenced by the subtle and often neglected patterns / rules of the esoteric, right? As one of my favoriteest memes that I've created, one of my favorite things I've made, in homage or honoring a bit of wisdom that is captured in a film by the name of Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds, which is available free on YouTube. It's an honest and genuine personal endorsement. Go check it out. It's one of those things, if you haven't seen it, and if I were talking to you in real life, I'd be like, dude, you haven't seen it? Go now, put it on. But the following can be found in that, and I quote, "The true crisis in our world is not social, political, or economic. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness." I'm going to pause the quotation there. That is where I think, if there is a higher calling to the function and purpose of what we call politics is somehow, it's there. It's that it is part and parcel of our crisis of consciousness, and therefore must serve as a lesson sounding board in the esoteric learning curve about comprehending this crisis of consciousness and what our consciousness is. That's a crazy radical statement to throw out there into the political arena, because most people are too busy hating each other over which political party is the most righteous for them to have the mental energy to even begin to think about what any of that even means. And that's the real problem, in my humble opinion. Let me continue with the quotation, because I think it is deeply applicable to the very political moment that we're living through right now. An inability to directly experience our true nature, an inability to recognize this nature in everyone and all things. So let me pause and comment. Let me backtrack, and if you find this pedantic, forgive me, but sometimes one must be pedantic in order to really explore the layers of interconnected meaning and implications of a given cluster of ideas. So let me back up to the beginning. Quote, "The true crisis in our world is not social, political, or economic. Our crisis is a crisis of consciousness, an inability to directly experience our true nature, an inability to recognize that nature in everyone and in all things." What the fuck does this have to do with the Judiciary Committee and their standoff over William Barr and his lies, and Trump and his potential collusion or not collusion, obstruction or not obstruction? Simple. The entire mishigas is distracting us from attending to the socio-political and economic let me back up. The mishigas is preventing us from attending to the root cause of the symptomologies that we call problems in our socio-political and economic worlds, right? So there is a root cause, and it is not a social cause. It is not a political cause. It is not an economic cause. I think that's what is meant there with the true crisis in our world is not either of these three things. There is symptomology of that crisis that is expressed in those realms, absolutely. But neither of those realms contain the cause of the problem, right? And Trump is one of those problems. Politics is one of those problems. That is, as I've said many times from the very beginning of the podcast, Trump himself is not responsible for the era we are living through. He's not the progenitor or the cause of Trumptopia. We've been building towards Trumptopia and Trumpopian thinking for a very long time. He's just the guy that gets to play out that role in this moment in history. He gets to be the person that embodies all of the symptomology of that dis-ease. That's the true crisis. And political circus acts, while often entertaining and often very much capable of inspiring people to feel good about themselves, unless they radically break through the false ideology of us versus them-ism, they're not really helping us to solve the problems. We're just sort of exacerbating the problem by talking about the problem over and over and over and over and over and over again. but talking about it in further and further and further degrees of distraction from where the root cause actually sits. So I closed my last episode by saying, is it too much to ask that we stop fighting over this president and start healing everyone? Is that just too much to ask? Because fighting over this president is going to get us nowhere. He may or may not be held criminally liable before or after he finally exits office. He may or may not attempt to establish himself as a tyrant. None of us know. We have our inclinations. We have our bullet point talking. We have our beliefs and our talking points, right? And where do we get them from? That's the real question. Where am I getting my beliefs and my talking points? Not from any given political outlet. That's for sure. I do believe. So let me try to, I said at one point this week that this show is supposed to be about the nexus, the intersection between our political culture and esoteric, mystical, spiritual practice. And for a lot of people, even for myself, I don't think I've completely lived up to expressing where I think that intersection and that nexus actually operates, other than inside ourselves, each and every one of us. But I hope that with these words, I might bring my sloppy and disorganized ramblings to some finer point. And I return to the quote, realizing there is only one consciousness. All right, let's stop there, because I know I've done this before, but anybody new joining now is going to be like, the fuck is he talking about? And there's lots of discussion about this. If you've been too busy with politics to catch up with the growing convergence and dialectic debate between science and esoteric thinkers, or science and Buddhists, etc., it's happening, folks. Science has been measuring some things and going, wow, isn't that interesting? Where have we heard about something like this before? And then realizing, oh, snap, ancient mystics described fractalism a long time ago, long before we had the mathematical models to measure and verify that indeed it appears that all of reality conforms to fractal mathematics. Whoa, what? So that's happening for reals, and I've talked about it in past episodes, so if your curiosity is there, go jump around some past episodes. But let's just look at this one sentence. Realizing there is only one consciousness. Now, you and I, as individuals, seem very different. I know for sure as fuck I don't feel like this persona that I am in this body avatar resembles our dear overlord President Trump. Thus, my membership in the resistance, officially, or, maybe even also unofficially. But I also belong to the human species, I think, despite whatever interesting, weird inclinations to think that I'm in the wrong place, in the wrong dimension, wrong timeline. That's just ego trying to seduce us into confronting reality as it actually is. And that's one of the things that I argue politics is part and parcel part of, distracting us from reality as it actually is. So, I invite you, dear friends, despite the fact that we're in the middle of a political discussion, let's pause. Let's take one moment to set down all political assumptions and ask ourselves the really bizarre, mindfucky question, what is consciousness? Now, I could tell you this source and that source, and this person or that person says this and that about it. But you know what's more powerful than that? Although, for some people, reading others' words about a concept they have difficulty understanding themselves is very helpful. But that, of course, exposes us to misrepresentations of the truth and or outright lies. here's the fun part about consciousness. Technically speaking, you must have it, right? You're sitting here, wherever you're sitting, listening to my words, which I'm recording over here, in wherever I'm sitting. And in order for you to be doing that, you are participating in consciousness. And in order for me to be doing what I'm doing, I must be participating in consciousness, right? There must be consciousness involved. So, what is it? Here's the fun bit. You don't need anyone else to answer that question for you. The problem is, our whole lives, we were force-fed some model or modality or concept or ideological answer to that question. That's why I said, let's pause. Let's set all assumptions down and really look at that question really hard. If you give yourself the opportunity, you can investigate consciousness in a singularly undebunkable way. And I was going to say the most undebunkable way, and that's by experiencing with honesty, with clarity, and without any predefining or pre-limiting assumptions, you can investigate consciousness within yourself. Guess what? You wouldn't be the first to try that. And while I just told you that you don't need to be told any paradigm or any model, you can look up for yourself the testimonies of those who have, in various ways, attempted that sort of exploration. Many of them will agree with the assertion that there is only one consciousness. Perhaps not all, but many of them will. And why would so many people who have investigated their own consciousness deep within themselves, abandoning all other ideas, dictates, declarations, assumptions, preconceived notions, ideological models about what consciousness might be, just to try and observe it directly? Why would they come back and say, yeah, I kind of have to agree with the idea that there is only one consciousness? Because perhaps that is evident and available to be observed within one's own phenomenological experience inside. Perhaps that is available to everyone. Returning to the quote, realizing there is only one consciousness. To awaken one's true self, one must awaken all beings. There are innumerable sentient beings in the universe. I vow to help them all to awaken. My imperfections are inexhaustible. I vow to overcome them all. The Dharma is unknowable. I vow to know it. The way of awakening is unattainable. I vow to attain it. Okay. Crazy sidebar, right? I'm talking about Judiciary Committee. I'm talking about political standoffs. I'm talking about echo chambers at work and full display for public to be perceived. And I'm asking everyone who might be inclined to listen to my podcast regarding this subject to go, wait, let's pause. Politics sells us crisis. But if there is no actual crisis at the core of politics because it's all operating according to design, which is to create conflict so that a profiteer class can profiteer on it, and then push the pendulum of normalcy back and forth between extremes of top-down dictatorship and some sort of relief in the opposite direction. Then we can see that the application of this sort of statement that I just read has everything to do with how we can actually solve all the problems that all the politicians are arguing about, because we don't need politics, we need organization in order to achieve complex goals, right? Politics clearly does not do that. We need to achieve complex goals, right? It's not easy to defend a population of people that are spread out across various geographic regions that are all bound together by the imaginary idea of borders and nationhood. We made that up. We made all of this up. We made up the Constitution. We made up the idea of impeachment. We made up the idea of a president that is supposed to be a democratically elected a democratically elected representative of the republic who simultaneously has king-like powers and cannot be criminally punished for committing crimes during office. We made all of that up, you guys. Okay? It does not exist in nature. And curiously, though, we keep trying to conflate these man-made political constructs with the creator of nature, which is really, 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 really bad idea. But that's a whole nother episode. I'm going to stop right here and say that what I wanted to declare was that events like, I'm going to come back to this point, right, and try to develop it a little bit further. Events like the Judiciary Committee hearing that are happening today are the rare moments when either politicians get to really live up to the idealized goals of working towards the greater good, working towards the pursuit of freedom and happiness, working towards the defense of the safety of the population of this country, etc., right? When we get to see them either genuinely do that or pretend to do that, and we get to see them deploy their often absurd political logic to try to prove that the opponent is incorrect. But when both parties utilize basically the same tactics in reverse at each other, it becomes clear that neither one of them is really able to win that political argument. And if neither one of them is really able to win a political argument about what is true and what is correct and what is and is not the law, when they're posturing so fiercely that neither side can really truly claim to be on the correct side of history, then, it really falls back to the people, I think. And, that's a whole nother episode, right? Even what I just said becomes a whole nother episode. I could ramble on for another 45 minutes of what does it mean. Both sides in the 45 minutes of the Judiciary Committee hearing that I did observe, both sides very passionately accused the other of being on the wrong side of history. I'm going to end this episode by saying, my friends, what I'm trying to point out is that both sides are indeed on the wrong side of history. Why? Because the crisis is not political. It's a crisis of consciousness. And I'm not the only person that's aware that that is the actual crisis that's going on. There's millions of us that understand that what's really going on is an inability to perceive reality clearly. Why can we not see reality clearly? because we have allowed ourselves as a species to depend more on ideas and ideology and its bastard children, dogma and blind faith belief constructs, and all the kinds of things that you might call a psychological manipulation, contingent on belief, regardless of verifiable fact-checking. And that truly, if we allow things to continue in the status quo of just letting politics continue to be politics and continue to fail as designed to really solve any of the problems. What it's designed to do? It's designed to create more opportunity for politics. And it's designed to create more opportunity for profiteering on the false ideological conflicts that politics creates. That's what politics is designed to do. And that, my friends, it has clearly been doing kind of effectively. But more and more people have walked away from politics over the same period of time, equivalent to people walking away from organized religion. And more people are looking within in order to perceive themselves clearly, instead of how the ideological echo chambers would rather you perceive yourself and others, right? More and more people are realizing that us versus them ideological conditioning is not organic to nature. More and more people are realizing that achieving political success is not the same as solving the political problems that politics creates. And that the more successful in politics a politician is, the more likely it is that their ability to actually solve problems is going to be constrained by the political system itself, which is providing that political success. I don't know. Maybe I sound crazy, but I think that the people who are on the wrong side of history are both all sets of ideological, political adherents. That the Democrats and the Republicans share the responsibility for creating this echo chamber dichotomy, and that the third parties are, despite, I'm sure, many well-intentioned people, already inculcated in the same sort of kinds of thinking, that even though, they're trying to stand up for a third alternative, they just fall in line with the left-right paradigm. And that the entire left-right paradigm is what is on the wrong side of history. Because we're currently, what they want you to, hold on, sorry. This is the bummer part of not of being unscripted and unorthodox and sort of genuinely direct from my process of comprehending, as opposed to sitting down and attempting to create well-crafted position papers or something, is that sometimes I start having multiple thoughts at once and I don't know how to integrate them all into one cohesive set of sentences. So you'll forgive that. But I think if there's one thing that this Judiciary Committee really proves, if you stop and look at it, not from a perspective of I'm supporting one side or the other because of this or that or whatnot, but rather, what are they actually trying to achieve? What are they actually doing? What are they actually saying? What logic and or logical fallacies are they implementing? What logical tools are they implementing? And we realize that if we observe politics from a neutral position of that I've just described, to analyze it, to truly analyze it, that it's always just going to be about pitting everybody down the middle or along the created lines of division, the engineered lines of division. And that while there may be a chaotic mess of good people and bad people and corrupt people and uncorrupt people, there's a greater momentum, larger than any of the given individual components of politics, that draws it towards a third direction. Because neither of the two polemic extremes seems to ever successfully take us anywhere. And so, history, I propose to you, is not wrapping itself around that ideological model. History itself, if we can call that a phenomena, the phenomena of events happening and unfolding due to influences and the participation of individuals and groups of people and aggregates of probability waveform functions, right? If we can call the full pantheon of events in motion history, not just the political narrative and the battle between the echo chamber's individual political narratives, but the broad picture of history. Political spectrum itself is on the wrong side of history. History will transcend politics. The movement that we will genuinely move forward through, that the movement that will carry us to a place of true growth, true improvement, true solutions, genuine achieving of a breaking free of these toxic systems, it is wholly and completely originating other than in politics, outside of the political narrative, from beyond the political spectrum. Am I making sense? The change that is coming, everyone's bracing for change, right? Everyone senses a need to prepare oneself for change and to choose what bracing for change means, and how you're going to respond to that change, how you're going to prepare for that change, how you're going to cope with the impact of that change. Now, the problem is the ideological machines are preparing everyone who's engaged in the ideological exercises of clinging to ideology. They're preparing you for the wrong change. The change that is coming, my friends, I humbly propose to you, the real change that is coming that's going to destroy the political problem through healing it, the real change that is coming that's going to completely remove this echo chamber from our minds is this change that is coming, that's going to radically alter everything as we know it, is originating from a place that is outside, beyond, and transcendently separate from politics. And for some people, that's so radical that they can't even wrap their brains around it. They can't imagine anything other than politics. And that's our calling, folks. That's the place from which I'm tackling my creative self-expression, is to call to attention to this other tidal wave for those who are not aware. There are plenty of people involved in this other radical development of change. They're the ones who have already been busy creating art and other forms of self-expression that bring to us ideas like what I just read, which at first glance may seem like it's got nothing to do with politics, right? And that's sort of my point. Like, the political problems that politics creates cannot be solved by politics. Duh. Einstein understood that. He spoke about it in his day and age. That was what? As he was developing the nuclear devices that brought the world's greatest war to an end through bloody violence, through horrible, horrific violence, so horribly horrific that it just stunned everyone into not participating in the war anymore. He said, as powerful as this is, we're never going to solve the problems using the same thinking we used to create them, right? That can very directly be translated into, and I think accurately translated into, we cannot solve the problems that politics creates using the tool of politics. So, you need, the first step, I think, I humbly propose to you, my friends, everyone who's caught up in political, ideological echo chamber warfare, we are being called to help them pull their eyes away from that shiny, seductive system of conflict profiteering. And that's hard to do, right? It's hard to do, especially when every day is an endless clusterfuck of political, theatrical bullshittery of such epic proportions. Mind you, that theater of politics can be observed purely for the entertainment factor, but we cannot let it define and shape the scope of what we focus on as we move forward through history. Because the world, reality, the universe, our lives, and the very forward momentum of that which we call history is grander and larger and more inclusive of bigger things than politics. And I think I've driven that point home redundantly enough. As always, my friends, thanks for listening. I'm going to let you get back to what you were doing with your brain before you started this podcast. Peace out.
And that is the latest madness from behind the orange wall. Thank you for listening to GMT, a special segment of the Almost Daily Zencast. Stay woke, Trumptopia. Stay woke.